Hey guys, this is a special end of the year episode. Today my guest is Grandmaster Felix Blohberger, who is the former Austrian chess champion, a very strong chess player and a great chess content creator and commentator. And together with him, jointly, we discuss what happened in chess in 2025, give the most important results of 2025 for chess, for the chess world, for the trends in the chess world, in how people play chess and what's going on. And also we give forecasts, predictions for 2026, the candidates, and many more. And at the end we play a fascinating Blitz game where I played the King's Gambit against my opponent. I was not afraid. Maybe I should have been. Take a look at this game, definitely watch till the end, and thank you for watching in the year of 2025. Enjoy the podcast. So guys, Happy New Year! And today here I'm with Grandmaster Felix Blohberger, who is a great expert in chess, as you might deduce from his title. And also, if you've been watching his instructive videos on his YouTube channel, you know that he is a pro in explaining chess, and he also delves into the area of predictions for chess. He has videos on who will win the World Cup, this or that round. I really love them, and I decided to make this podcast a very creative one. I decided to dedicate it to analyzing what happened in the year of 2025 in the world of chess, and planning for 2026 and trying to forecast, to predict 2026, including the candidates and lots of other different events that are awaiting us. So Felix, thank you very much for agreeing to this and helping me do this.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. It's nice to be on your channel actually for the second time. Yeah, so it's great to be back. Thank you.
Yeah, but before we start, I wanted to discuss a little bit some news from your chess career. So you've recently been in great shape. You've had great performances at both the World Cup and at the Croatian League. How are you feeling?
Yeah, pretty good. The World Cup specifically gave me quite a lot of confidence, I would say, where I was able to advance to the second round and then only get knocked out in the Blitz tiebreaks against Wei Yi. So that was a pretty good achievement overall. I even had some chances to win against Wei Yi in the tiebreaks. Yeah, and I was able to continue my form after that in Croatia. So very happy that it's going better again. Like this year has been quite rough for me. I had this pretty horrible tournament in the European Championship. And since then, I didn't play so much, and the things I played didn't go as well as I wished for. Those results then have an extra special feeling, like if you get out of this sort of slump for which you've been for some time.
I wonder what has changed, because you said, for example, in one of your videos that you started working out more during the tournament. Probably you've adjusted some other things. We've discussed some psychology things in our previous episode. But what is it that you think is the most important for your recent good shape?
Well, in the World Cup, I did not implement this this heavy workout routine just yet. This was something I've only tried in Croatia. In the World Cup, it's difficult for me to pinpoint a specific thing why it went as well as it did. I think one thing could be that I didn't really feel a lot of pressure in the World Cup. Like I was the underdog in both of the matches, so I had the feeling like if I'm gonna lose the match, no one is gonna be like that shocked because I'm anyway the underdog and I only have something to win there, which gave me this, I wouldn't call it carefree play, but it got a bit closer to that than in some of the other tournaments I compete in. And well, in Croatia, it was sort of still this momentum which I've had from the World Cup, that I saw that I am able to play well sometimes at the very least, and I was able to continue that in Croatia. I think those are the main points.
So you played Wei in the match, who's a 2700 plus rated player, very strong, obviously, grandmaster. And I was wondering, when you analyze your level and yourself in the broader context of the strongest chess players in the world, what do you think is there that you need to improve to also get to that prestigious super elite level of 27 plus 100 FIDE rating?
Well, one thing which I've certainly noticed, especially against Wei Yi when I played him, was that it's simply still a completely different level than what I'm playing at. To be completely honest, the only game I was able to win in the first tiebreak was simply because he more or less overpushed. And this was also my strategy for the match. I am able to play fairly solidly and make it difficult for my opponents to win. The strategy worked out pretty well. Since then, in this one game, he overpushed in one endgame and I was able to win that game. But if he would have not done that, like in almost all of the games, I always had the feeling that I am on the defending side. It was also the same in the classical games against him. So what needs to change is that I need to be somehow able to exert pressure myself on those players, which obviously is an incredibly difficult thing to do. And I don't think that there's like a quick fix for that. It just comes with experience, with continuously working on chess, and perhaps also with some extra confidence that you are able to actually beat those guys, which I'm not on that level yet. I hope to be there in a couple of years, but it's just very difficult. Like Wei Yi is such a strong player. I think his peak was around 2770, and he's been in this 2700 club for so many years. So it's, of course, a very difficult opponent, but I'm still quite happy about my achievement that I was able to hold a couple of games against him where he put a lot of pressure. And even to win this one game was a cool thing.
Have those instances recently when those superhuman 2700 plus rated players were defeated by mere mortal 25 or 2600 rated players, were those instances inspirational for you? Did they give you some confidence boost that yes, I can also do it? They can be hurt on the chessboard.
Yeah, certainly. It also plays a role. I mean, I've also seen it in my experience that even maybe not with 2700 players, but very highly rated 2600 players, that sometimes I am able to have chances against them. So that's what I realized. Like when I was not a grandmaster yet, I've always seen those 2600 plus players as the pure gods of chess, and they are kind of untouchable. They will never blunder anything. That's not the case. Of course, they blunder almost never, but it does happen sometimes. They do make mistakes as well. So it's not impossible to beat them. And as we see nowadays, as you've mentioned, many times 2,500 players, 2,600 players win against super grandmasters, which I guess is a perfect example of this year's World Cup. Like we've seen so many of the top guys drop out pretty early. And this is just the development of modern chess nowadays, that everyone is simply getting better and better. And it's also becoming increasingly difficult for the top guys to beat the low-rated opponents, because everyone has an engine at home and they just press the spacebar until the game is dead, basically.
Yeah, so we are gradually coming to the topic of analyzing the year of 2025 and what we learned from this year in chess. And I wanted your help and your advice on this, because I really see kind of two conflicting things. On the one hand, I see lots of strong players struggle to win games, even against lower rated opponents, even against much lower rated opponents, let's say 200 rating points lower than them. Lots of top players complain, even some of them on my podcast or in private, that it's so hard to win games now. But then there are some other players, like in this year, we take the recent example of Nodirbek Abdusattorov. He is crushing currently the London Chess Classic event. He won 5 games in a row, all against 26, 30 plus rated opponents. And seemingly he doesn't have a problem with doing that. Or Gukesh and Arjun in the previous Olympiad. They managed somehow to just destroy all the opponents, even though still like a year ago, the engines already were very strong. So at that Olympiad, already I think the same things could have been said about the difficulty of finding opening ideas to suppress your opponent. So how does that correlate, those two factors, that there are some guys who just win all the games and others who complain? Like, have those other guys failed to adapt to the changes? I don't know. Like, you probably have an opinion on this.
Yeah, it's very difficult. Probably this adaptation is one thing. Like, you simply cannot play chess, especially openings. I mean, purely openings, the way we have been doing that like 10 years ago, for example, because now most of those lines have been analyzed until the very end, or many of those things are well known already. So you really need to adapt. And you named quite a couple of good examples. I think that Arjun and Abdusattorov perhaps as well are very good examples for how to approach the openings nowadays. Like, I think Arjun is perhaps the best example, that he plays almost a new opening in every game, has one small idea in all of those lines, sometimes kind of a tricky idea as well. And this is the way I believe you need to approach the game. There are still a couple of even strong grandmasters that often play very similar openings, even sometimes the same opening. But I think it's only possible to do that until a certain point. And after that, unless you're working all day long on this one opening to find ideas and ideas and ideas, it's so difficult to play that against a well-prepared opponent. So you need this flexibility. And one point which is not talked about that often, which I believe is also very important, is also the fact that nowadays games are just in general much longer than they used to be, because, well, you're not going to get an advantage out of the opening in most times. You're basically happy with white if you just get a playable position, which your opponent is maybe not so familiar with. So I think this the aspect of being able to play long games and having the energy to do that is becoming increasingly more important in modern chess. And, well, the World Cup is an extreme example because it's generally such a long format. But also in normal, let's say, 9-round open tournaments, I think the players that are preparing quite a lot at the beginning of the tournament tend to run out of energy once the tournament progresses onto the last rounds. So I think that we need to take this point into very serious consideration. That, of course, preparation is nice and important, but at the end of the day, it also comes down to being able to play long games. And nowadays, I think we see many games then being decided in some endgames, some long struggles there where energy plays a role, maybe endgame understanding as well. So, of course, openings are very important, but the physical aspect is becoming increasingly more important as well, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's why the younger guys seem to be more successful recently. Not just that's not the only reason, definitely, right? But physical resilience is very, very important. Yeah. And also, you mentioned endgames. By the way, I would recommend your series on endgames on your YouTube channel. Very instructive, guys. Check it out. I'll link it in the description. So, do you think that the role of endgames has increased over the last years for the top players? Because it less often happens that you get a crushing advantage out of the opening like Kasparov did back in the days usually.
Yeah, it would be very nice to see some statistics on that, how it has developed over the years, but it would be kind of my guess that the games are simply becoming longer. That would be my guess, but maybe I'm completely wrong with that.
Yeah, lots of experience from recent practice come to mind, like this game between I think Noderbek and Erdogmush, right? Yeah. almost infinite. So yeah, that was a great one. Experts in statistics in the comment.
Help us out.
Vladimir Borisovich, yes. If you're watching this, help us out on this. Yeah, interesting point. And also, you mentioned that those guys who are most successful these days play practically any opening under the sun. I've recently discussed this with Boris Gelfand in the episode that will probably be released before this one. And he said that there are pluses and minuses of this approach. For you, what have you decided for yourself? Because I remember that you have a repertoire, but you sometimes surprise your opponents still. I'm watching your recaps and I see that.
Yeah, I completely agree with Mr. Gelfand, of course, that it has those downsides that you cannot play everything and be also super familiar with all of the different structures in most cases. I think that Arjun is probably like one exception perhaps because he's simply working so hard. And if he plays something, I think, well, he has a couple of people working for him. That's probably the one aspect. And I feel like he also really tries to get familiar with the positions. So it's not like he just plays a line which he just quickly checked, but I believe that he's really putting in a lot of work at home to have those ideas ready and to understand them. But that's of course not what everyone can do. And therefore, like if you're just playing many different lines and don't have such a big knowledge behind them, what can happen is that your opponent surprises you there a little bit, and then you're just not so familiar with the opening itself. So this is of course quite a big downside. But of course the upside is that very often you are just surprising your opponent. He will not be able to prepare against you some long and dangerous lines. So you need to have this kind of mix of both of them to have like a healthy mix, to not play too much where you cannot keep up with all of the different plans and ideas. But at the same time, you should have some different ideas to surprise your opponent. What I try to do is to stick to my playing style when it comes to the openings. I generally don't really like to sacrifice a lot of material early in the game, and also don't want to allow my opponent to do the same. So I try to find some lines which are solid. If you forget one or two moves, then you won't be lost right away. I think this is also generally quite a practical approach for people that don't have the time to work on chess nonstop, because sometimes you are just going to forget the things. So sticking to your style is probably the most important thing to that, and trying to have some flexibility in the lines is the key takeaway for me.
But you have to all the time look for some new ideas and analyze some new stuff, right?
Yeah, if you're playing on the, I would say on the grandmaster level and above, maybe nowadays even a little bit below that, but I wouldn't say that it's like for amateurs. Typically, I don't think it's so important. Typically, it's enough for them if they have one well-structured repertoire which they are following. In most cases, it should be enough.
But I can say also, I can speak from my own experience. I'm currently around 2000 FIDE, and in tournaments, people prepare for me. When I play the same lines over and over again, they go deep, like 20 plus moves of top engine moves. It gets hard when you're playing a lower rated opponent who is still like instantly playing 25 moves. So even at that level, it becomes a challenge.
No, that's true. I mean, also I played some league games recently, also against players around your rating range, and they also have this preparation quite long. So it's very difficult. Of course, it would be nice to have more flexibility in the opening, but for the average person that goes to work from Monday to Friday, I think it's just very difficult for them. Maybe they have a family, maybe they have kids to take care of. It's difficult for them to study numerous openings, I would say. So that's why I said it's probably the most practical then to have openings where you have some flexibility in them. For example, I believe the King's Indian might be a good example, where you always have the same structure which you can get. Obviously, nowadays there are quite a few forcing lines there as well, but you're more or less always going to get the same type of position, the same structure, and at the end of the day, there the understanding in most cases is going to prevail if you're not running into some very unlucky preparation by your opponent.
Yeah, which can happen, by the way, in the King's Indian. As a King's Indian player myself, I can attest to that. By the way, Felix's new course should be already out by the time we upload this episode. The course is on the King's Indian defense, so check it out. I'm going to do that definitely. So if we come back to the topic of analyzing the year of 2025 and giving predictions for the future of chess, do you think that more and more top players will adopt the same approach? Like there will be no players who like MVL play the same, like Najdorf in all the games, maybe with slight changes and sometimes change in some lines, but still Najdorf against one e4. But do you think that there will be more players like Arjun who can play anything, who can play the Scandinavian with Queen d6 in some game, and then play the Sicilian and play the French, the modern defense, and that more guys from the top will adopt this approach.
Well, I think it's already started quite a long time ago, basically. I mean, you named the perfect example, MVL, and I think also he was changing from his Najdorf and from his Grunfeld. I think it started like 4 or 5 years ago. There was this candidates tournament, it might have been in Yekaterinburg, this segment, where all of a sudden he implemented the French, if I'm not mistaken. Also started to play some Slav and those things. So I think it already started, and I believe from the top players, from the top of my head, I cannot really name anyone who just plays one opening. Maybe Mazdrid doesn't play e4, but still dabbles around with d4, c4, knight f3, and plays a lot of systems in there. But to stick with one first move is very, very difficult, I would say. Maybe Dominguez is one player that purely plays e4 and has a lot of ideas and works very hard to get playable positions there. But from most of the top players, they're already very, very flexible when it comes to openings.
What do you think is like the golden standard for a top player these days? How many openings, for example, against one e4 should you be well versed in if you're playing with the black pieces? Let's take just the simplest example. Because against one d4, against one c4, obviously you need to have different alternatives. But let's start with e4.
Well, my strategy was mostly to have 2 different weapons. One where you have sort of a more solid approach, and one where you might be able to get better winning chances. For me personally, like this year, I had it that e5 was my, against e4, to have e5 as my sort of solid weapon. And if I want to create some imbalances, then I'm going to play the French. This was it for this year, because I also made a course on the French and I was very confident in those lines. And I tried to do the same in other openings to have at least 2 systems which I can rely on and which I can switch in between. And everything which I have extra from that is nice, but not always entirely necessary. Mm-hmm. So this is kind of like the baseline to have two major systems.
Mm-hmm. And with white?
With white, I'm more flexible. Generally, for many years already, I've played every single serious first move. So c4, d4, e4, knight f3. This year, mostly some closed openings. I haven't played e4 that much. Just in the World Cup, I tried to come back to surprise my opponent, which worked nicely against Lupulescu. But with white, I typically change with this e4 and then d4, c4, knight f3. For like 1 year, I mostly play e4 and throw in a couple of d4 games. And then the next year, I feel like, okay, I had enough of this and let me switch back to some other things.
I love it that there is kind of some mind game element. Well, chess obviously is a mind game in some sense, but also like the mind game, the meta mind game, that you are thinking of what your opponent will look through when he or she is analyzing your previous games, and you like throw in some extra moves, first moves to make the task harder. How often do you think of such meta strategies?
Yeah, definitely. I always take into consideration what my opponents are able to see from my own games. And if you have played one line a couple of years ago, the chance that they are going to prepare seriously for it is obviously going to decrease by quite a bit. But if you have played one line already quite a lot recently, then I try not to repeat it too often, because your opponent is most likely going to prepare against it.
Yeah, sounds logical. So coming back to the topic of how chess is evolving and how chess at the top level is evolving, what do you think will be happening in 2026 and upcoming years? Will there be more and more draws in classical chess? Or will the top guys invent more and more interesting ideas, resources, and still manage to outplay their opponents if their opponents are, for example, lower rated?
I think that most people are a bit too worried about there being generally too many draws and so on. Of course, it has a tendency to become more and more drawish, but I think that at least for quite some time still, we are going to find more and more ideas to just get a game and play. Obviously, we also see quite a lot of developments with speed chess, which does make it a lot easier to get some interesting games too. So I think that nowadays generally it's a little bit harsh about the developments. I would be a little bit more optimistic, and obviously you never know. In a couple of years, maybe it is like this, that you can actually not really get a game. But at some point, like, the human mind can also not absorb everything. So like, we have so many different things to try, and I believe that players are going to find more and more ideas, at least for the years to come.
Yeah, hopefully, because I'm a fan of a big fan of classical chess, even though Fischer random freestyle is interesting, but for me not as interesting. Can I ask a stupid question about the speed chess formats? So everybody is saying that speed chess is better because less drawish tendencies. Is it because you can play some weird line and the opponent has no time to figure out over the board how to react? Or what is the main reason? Why is speed chess less drawish?
Yeah, I would say just because there's less time and more mistakes are prone to happen because people are blundering with less time on the clock. They're committing mistakes which they typically wouldn't commit in classical games. And therefore, the drawish tendency just decreases by quite a lot because mistakes do happen quite way more frequently than in classical chess.
Yeah, I also find it fascinating that people have like Dubov, for example, have some weird ideas, like very risky ideas for speed chess, and Dubov famously got quite far in the World Cup this year using some Frankenstein Dracula variations in his openings. Do you do that as well, or because of your style, it's not so applicable?
I don't really play that many gambits or things like that, but I think it's actually a good approach for speed chess. Like, I see many players who have this more aggressive style do generally very well in the shorter time controls, because with low time on the clock, it's very difficult to reply to some aggressive openings. Like, you see this threat, like my king is in danger, even though I'm maybe a piece up. You start to see some ghosts, and with maybe more time on the clock, you wouldn't be so worried. But with just seconds running down your clock, I think this approach is actually very effective. But of course, you need to also be the right player to be able to do that.
About the results of the World Cup and Grand Swiss and the lineup for the candidates, that was another topic I wanted to discuss with you. Well, the first question is, how surprised are you that those 8 guys qualified? Obviously, about some of them, it could have been expected, but about others, what do you think?
Okay, I'm super surprised, and I think that most people who are saying that they saw this all coming are probably lying, because like who expected those, maybe not with the candidates, but generally in the World Cup, that all of the guys who went so far were able to go so far, because there were so many top players that got knocked out on the way. Martinez is a good example, as strong as a player he is. I mean, he knocked out, was it Abdusattorov? Then was it another? Hare Krishna was there for sure. Like, I certainly did not expect all of this. And with the candidates, well, I would say that we have definitely a couple of surprises. I would also say Sindarov is to some extent definitely a surprise, as strong as he is. He also had a lot of challenges there, and well, in the World Cup, many things can happen, but I always felt like match experience is generally still quite an important factor. And this seemed to play less of a role in this World Cup, but from what I could tell, it was probably more of those energy levels, which were quite important, because all of the guys that made it to the end were quite young compared to some of the other players. So yes, overall, I'm quite surprised about some of the players that made it to the candidates. But I think it's very cool to have all of those people in the candidates tournament. Like, it's a very fresh. There are many fresh pairings there, and it's going to be really exciting to follow.
Do you think that the fact that so many 2,600 rated players, or even sometimes 2,500 rated players, that they got those wins in the World Cup against super grandmasters, do you think that this illustrates the fact that the rating system currently is broken?
I do have this feeling that there could be a lot of improvements in the rating system, but I always hesitate to talk too badly about it, because I'm not an expert on it, and I also don't really have any great ways to fix it. I mean, one thing which is certainly something which FIDE should consider is to implement this rule that rating that you cannot simply sit on your rating without playing. I think that this is something which should be implemented to some extent, because we have many top players, and well, I guess everyone has heard about that. They mostly play in those close tournaments. They always face against each other, and they mostly have the same rating. And once many of them compete in open tournaments, they quite often tend to lose a lot of rating there, because all of the low-rated guys are actually not so bad, and they do have a chance to beat some very strong players too. But I find it difficult to propose any huge ways to change it. But one thing is clear for me, that generally many players are underrated in nowadays atmosphere.
Do you think anyone from the candidates is underrated? Or do you think that, for example, Bluebaum will perform at approximately his current rating, that his performance rating will be around 2680, or I think he's around there currently in the candidates tournament. So will he overperform or will he underperform?
Again, hard to say. What I can say about Bluebaum is that certainly he's going to be extremely well prepared. He is generally one of the players who prepares very seriously for openings, and I can imagine that for the candidates tournament he's really gonna work like an animal to have the best possible openings. How that's gonna reflect in the results largely depends on the opponents, of course, what they come up with as well. If I would have to give a prediction about Bluebaum specifically, is that he could definitely perform better than his rating, because he is a very solid player, and well, even if he makes all draws, still he will probably not win the tournament, but he's gonna perform above his rating. Back to your question, who is probably the most underrated in the tournament? I would probably say Esipenko, because he has been on this 2730, 2740, and he just hasn't played much recently, or not as much as some of the other players. And I also really liked his general preparation, and at least it looks like he is very relaxed always. Even coming back from this crazy blunder against Wei Yi was something not many people, I believe, could have done. So I think this is going to be quite a big advantage for him, that he has this very calm attitude.
Yeah, definitely. And he's definitely very strong. Having beaten Magnus in Classical is also not an achievement many can boast. What about Sindarov? He hasn't been the most famous Uzbekistani player recently, but this year he's on a roll.
Yeah, he was always in the shadow of Abdusattorov, I would say, and he's also not above 2700 for so long. Actually, I think he only crossed it at the beginning of this year. Obviously, also before that, always a very strong player, but since he was always in this shadow of Abdusattorov, and of course there are so many talents in Uzbekistan, so that it's difficult for all of the fans to keep up who is doing the best from all of them. But he's definitely, of course, also someone to watch out for in the candidates who can perform extremely well. Like what I've seen from him in the tournament, that generally he doesn't really commit many grave mistakes. This was one of his many great assets in the World Cup.
What do you think about Wei Yi? He had a very interesting career. He's been a guest of my podcast, by the way. For all the viewers who didn't watch it, I recommend it. I'll link it in the description. So he told me his story of how his parents forced him to go to the university, or maybe not forced, but encouraged, and he gave up chess for several years. Do you think that like this has negatively affected him, that he would have been stronger if not for this?
The logical answer would be yes. If he would have spent those, 4 or 5 years studying chess all the time and not studying, maybe he could be 2800 by now, who knows, maybe he would be world champion. But you never know these things. And on the other hand, it could also be positive for him. Like it's nice for anyone to have a good education. You learn some other things as well. Maybe he feels less pressure now that he has also like a formal education, that he has this sort of safety. Like if he decides one day, okay, I have enough of chess, I will do something else, he can easily get a job with a college education. So you never know how things would have developed differently, but I think he's on a good track now, and he's on the way to the level I expected him to be already some time ago.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about his style?
Generally quite dynamic, I would say. It's something I would more or less notice about Chinese players in general, that they have a very, very solid repertoire. Also, when I played against Wei Yi, I noticed that. But they are incredible calculators. This is what I would say is quite exceptional about them. And Wei Yi is probably the perfect example. He has so many fantastic attacking games where he just calculates everything. So I think this would be his style as well.
Yeah, I've also noticed it. It's interesting that those guys, especially the Chinese grandmasters, love openings like the Petrov so much, even though they are like very dynamic and calculating. Maybe I don't know something about the Petrov.
Yeah, I was also surprised, like also preparing against Wei Yi, he plays the Petrov all the time. Of course, he also has a fantastic strategical understanding, but from the player type, it's kind of a surprising thing, but they do very well with their approach.
Whom should we discuss as well? Of course, Anish. Anish recently tweeted that he has assembled a super team of seconds for the candidates, and that he's ready to win the candidates. Do you think that he is among the favorites?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in my view, Fabiano is the favorite. If you can even say that, because a favorite even has still quite a low probability of winning in this format, because everyone it's not like Fabiano is much stronger than the rest of them, but I do feel like he has this experience which still counts. He's also someone who I don't think really seems like in good physical shape. I don't think he's going to run out of energy that quickly. But of course, I mean, it's going to be difficult to keep up with the younger guys like Sindarov and so on, who do also have some incredible fighting spirit. Fabi would probably be my number one pick, and Anish is somewhere on the top as well. But it's just so hard to say, like, also with who has what percentage of winning. But I would say Anish is somewhere in the middle to the top.
And if, for example, there are 8 players, so mathematically, like the combined percentage will be 100%. How big of a percentage probability would you give to Fabi winning the candidates? Would it be somewhere like 25 or more?
I would say like 20 to 25, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
I would give, maybe 25 or so, something like that. 25, yeah, sounds reasonable.
Many people would ask here about Hikaru, because he is on paper rated 15 points higher than Fabi, and has also had some great performances. Obviously, recently he has been training against much lower rated opponents in this Mickey Mouse tournaments, but still, what do you think about his chances?
Yeah, I even completely forgot now that he's actually participating. He is definitely also one of the favorites, I would say. It's hard to say because he has not played a lot of classical chess against at least stronger opposition. So that might be a small difficulty. I don't know if he still has some tournaments before the candidates, or I'm quite sure that he is going to have some training games at the very least. But this is going to be a challenge for him, I would say, because all of the other players are quite active in classical chess. But still, he has quite a few things that go well for him. Like, obviously, at least if we believe him, then he does not really feel a lot of pressure because it's only a hobby for him. I'm not sure that this is like 100% true, but to some extent, it is certainly a thing that, of course, his main thing nowadays is streaming. He makes a very good living of that. And he's not really, the prize money there is probably not something that extraordinary for him. So the financial thing is not an issue for him anymore, as far as I can see.
As for me, I believe that he believes that he doesn't care, but probably he can start caring once the victory is within reach and the title. It's hard not to care in such moments.
Yeah, at least not to care at all. I don't think, especially for players on that level, I think there's always going to be some emotional factor in the game.
But you still think that Fabi is a bit more likely to win than Hikaru, or not?
I would say so. I would pick Fabi as my tournament favorite. But I mean, yeah, who knows? Anything can happen.
I think Hikaru said, by the way, that he will not be playing any classical events before the candidates, if I'm not mistaken. But probably he will have some strong players working for him and playing training games. But still, how important is this being in form after having played several top events? Do you think this is not wise for a top player before the candidates to not have such practice?
I guess everyone needs to figure out their own approach to that. It's difficult for me because I never played in the candidates and probably never will. But my logical understanding would be that you need some good balance. Like, you shouldn't play too much before the event, obviously, otherwise you're too tired. But to play nothing for quite a long time also seems like a risky approach, because it might turn out then that you're kind of rusty and you haven't played in a while. And I think you should have a balance. Like, when are the candidates? It's like in March or something?
April, I think.
April to May, yeah. So maybe to have one tournament before that, maybe something like Wei Yi or something would be what I would recommend to someone, I guess.
Yeah. What about Pragg? So probably he is like 99% that he goes to the candidates because he has such an immense lead in the FIDE circuit this year. If we consider that it's like almost unavoidable that he's in the candidates, is he also like one of those guys who has a relatively high chance of winning the event?
Yeah, I would put him probably on third place of my rank. So first one being Fabi, then Hikaru, and then Pragg, and then probably Anish, and then the list goes on like that. Definitely has chances. Also, of course, an incredibly hard worker. He's going to be incredibly well prepared for that event, obviously. Yeah, also in the last candidates, I think he did perform quite well.
50%, I think. Maybe
50%.
Maybe +1. I don't remember. He won that last game. Yeah, I remember.
But he was not that close to winning, right?
Yeah.
There was still some.
He was not in contention, I think.
Okay. Well, he has done now this tournament experience as well. I've been saying experience on this podcast for quite a few times now, but I still do feel like it can matter to some extent. I think it's difficult for players. I don't know if anyone else except for Gukesh managed to win the candidates at the first try. It would also be interesting to check, but like typically if you play such a prestigious event, you must feel at least some sort of pressure if you're competing there for the first time.
Well, Magnus won for the first time if we don't count the matches system, because they changed it, the system.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, but Magnus is Magnus. Yeah, by the way, Pragg scored 7 out of 14 in the candidates. He had up and down tournament. 3 losses, 3 wins.
Yeah, then probably not the event he generally hoped for. Even with rating performance, he was probably maybe on ex-equo, but yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. But I would place him in one of the contenders for sure. You
say that you are happy that those new guys are participating in the event, and I'm also happy. I think that it will breathe a new life maybe in the candidates, because lots of randomness, unpredictability, and fighting chess will ensue, hopefully. But do you feel some kind of pity that, for example, Vincent, Keymer, or Noderbek Abdusattorov, or Alireza Firuja, people who obviously are extremely strong and would be very fun to watch in the candidates, and probably any of them could be among the favorites or at least close to being the favorite to win the event. How do you feel about them not qualifying for this candidates?
Yeah, of course it's a pity. I mean, especially I was rooting for Vincent to qualify because of obviously he's a fantastic player and also a great person. He also lives in Vienna, by the way, my own home city, which is also cool. More generally, I feel like the whole qualification system to the candidates is something which can also be modified a little bit. Like it's a little bit random to put it like this, which can be good on the one side. As we see, we now get a fantastic tournament, which with some pairings which we've never seen before. On the other hand, we would like to be the candidates tournament to be as strong as possible with all of the strongest players in the world participating. It's hard to say what can be changed, but it feels, as you said, it feels like a little bit of a shame that so many of the top 10 players are not in there, even though they obviously would have deserved to be there. But that sport, at the end of the day, even if you're one of the strongest players in the world, sometimes you are not going to get this opportunity.
Yeah. I also obviously forgot to mention Arjun. I think he also belongs to this category.
Yeah. Of course, yeah. I mean, maybe there could be some other way of qualifying to the World Championship match. Okay, generally nowadays with this new format coming in, it's all a little bit of a mess. Like if I'm completely honest here, I have to be fair again. I am also not sure how exactly it can be. It can be fixed, but there should be some brainstorming going on here because I don't feel like the current system is the best possible version.
Fully agreed. Yes, hopefully FIDE haven't heard so much criticism over the last year. Maybe adjust something or does something, or maybe the total World Chess Championship pioneers some interesting formats that will be adopted in the cycle as well. I want some hot take for the last part of our episode before we proceed with the traditional Blitz game. Notably, Abdusattorov, in his interview, I think it was on the FIDE channel.
Give us your unpopular chess opinion.
Gukesh will lose his title in next match. Is that controversial? I mean...
Said when asked about a hot take that Gukesh will lose his title in the next match. I wanted to ask you, do you think that Gukesh will lose his title in the next match?
It really depends who he's gonna play against. Like, I feel like Fabiano, for example, would be a very difficult opponent for him. Maybe against someone else, he would have much better chances. Generally, the World Championship matches are, I feel, very close to 50-50 anyway, because there's not such a big difference in all of these players. I mean, even in the Magnus matches we saw, even though Magnus was undoubtedly the stronger player. Maybe against Fabi, the match, it was really one of the closest matches ever. But against Karyakin, for example, it was clear that Magnus is the best player, but still it was incredibly difficult for him to win the match. At some point, it even looked like he was in a lot of danger to lose the match. So it largely depends on the exact pairing. And no matter what it's gonna be, it's still a very close matchup. Of course, there's a chance for Gukesh to win. I can give another hot take, like the World Championship match against Sting. Of course, I'll probably not be the only one to say that, but I was not really so happy with the match quality overall. But I mean, to be fair to the players, of course, Sting was not and is not in the greatest state of minds. For Gukesh, obviously, it was an incredible pressure. Like everyone was saying, if you don't win against Sting, then like even my grandma could win against him. All of this is entirely unfair, but still it gets to the players, yeah. So we cannot forget this point for sure.
Yeah, but still coming back to the question, obviously it's close to 50-50, but if a top player like Fabi or Hikaru wins the candidates and faces Gukesh in the match, do you think that the probability is in favor of the other guys?
Yeah, I would say so, yeah, but very, very slightly.
So like 55-45 or something like that?
If we take the Fabi scenario, like let's say Fabi wins the candidates, I would give Fabi maybe 60-65%.
What about Hikaru?
It would be interesting to know their past history because that also plays a big role. And I haven't looked at the stats exactly. I guess they haven't had so many classical games against each other.
Mm-hmm.
I'd still give Hikaru the preference probably, but for some reason not as large. Like I'm such a big Fabi fan for many years but maybe also like 55-60% for Hikaru. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we will see. It's going to be a very exciting year with the candidates and the match that probably will also happen. Guys, if you disagree with any of the points that we raised in the podcast, please drop a comment. If you agree, also say what you agree with. It is always interesting to read your opinions. And so we have a tradition at the end of this podcast, just like any other podcast. I play Blitz with time odds against my guests. So as usual, 1 against 5 would work all right for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I hope I can keep my performance from last time.
Yeah, you crashed me last time. Okay. So I'm making the first move. You should make the first move, and then I make the second move, and we wait until the clock. Okay, E5. Till the clock runs down. Okay, I have to do it for the content. I have to play the King's Gambit, and we wait.
No.
We wait 4 minutes. Also,
I need to prepare now. Yeah.
No, I will distract you with my questions before we start. So, guys, for all of you interested, the standard format at the end of such episodes is that my guest, being a much stronger player than me, gives me time odds, and 1 against 5 is the default option. By the way, do you like playing Bullet? Do you do it often, or are you more of a Blitz guy?
Generally, I don't play a lot of online chess nowadays. I simply don't have the time. But I used to play quite a lot of Bullet specifically, and also Blitz. But I really loved to play Bullet when I was a bit younger. But more recently, just didn't have the time much for it. But I am thinking of going back to streaming maybe a little bit more and to get a bit more active in the online chess scene.
I'm interested in how you approach openings in online chess, because everybody knows your account, or at least can find your account. Are you playing your main openings there, or are you trying to hide your preparation, or do you have some secret account, something like that?
On chess.com, I only have my official account. On Leeches, I do have one anonymous one, where then I'm more happy to play some of my main openings. But of course, if I'm playing on an official account, I will maybe play my main openings, but not reveal anything which I haven't played before.
Mm-hmm. So yeah. New ideas, you have to sit on them and conserve them.
Yeah, more or less. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And like, does it happen that you know that there is like an amazing idea in this line and you really want to play it, but you're like, stop, Felix, you should not do it. People will find out.
Yeah, it has happened sometimes, but mostly I don't even go to some of the lines, I would say, where I know that I have something, because then I might get tempted to play it, and don't want that to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you think online Blitz helps with for you personally? Because I've heard different accounts. Obviously, there is the traditional Soviet approach: do not play Blitz, and there is the modern approach that lots of strong guys basically learned to play chess and to play at very high levels, playing just Blitz.
Yeah, I think it's actually quite helpful, but first of all, you should take it seriously. I think that myself included, often if I play Blitz online, I'm listening to a podcast on the side of it, or listening to some music, or doing some other things next to it. And that's certainly not a great approach. I think the most value you can take out of it is by playing the game and then immediately just going over it a little bit. Even if it's just 1 minute, just to briefly check what went wrong or what went right and what you can learn from that game. And this is also what I try to implement nowadays if I play online Blitz.
So you click the game review button right after the game. You don't click the rematch button, or after the rematch you do this.
I try to immediately look at the game. I mean, sometimes if you have some match ongoing, then it's often difficult, but at least to have some quick look at the game is always important.
Okay, I'll definitely analyze this one. And we are ready to start. 1 minute.
Yes.
Okay, you do this. Okay, is this in your repertoire?
I had a look at this some time ago.
Yeah, I know that this line exists, but obviously I don't know the theory. I remember that this is the position that
I'll
you
just
get.
try to go into some endgame. Problem is I don't see sometimes the move which you make, but I'll try to manage. There is some issue with my Chrome browser.
Wow.
But
I hope it's not too bad. Okay.
Bishop f4.
I did something not very necessary, I think. Okay. Okay. Well, at least I'm not losing out of the openings this time. But maybe this will not last long. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Mhm.
How is your rook getting out?
That's a problem.
Like this.
Maybe this, yes. Is my only attempt. Still, I'm not a fan of my position, obviously. Okay. Yeah. Okay, I can resign now. technical play in endgames.
I didn't want to enter any of the King's Gambit complications.
But you schooled me in an endgame. So that proves your point about the importance of learning endgames.
Yeah,
but still, I shouldn't. Probably e5 was wrong, right? To create this weakness on e5, which you later took.
No, e5 is always okay, I think, but you should take on d6 after I play on d6.
I mean bishop b5, allowing you to take on e5, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think white is supposed to take, and then white is even maybe a tiny bit better because of some more piece activity and the nice center, but yeah, it should be manageable for black too.
Yeah. So obviously in the end game it was already minus 1.8 after 13 moves. So I did get a losing position after the opening. Yeah, but then it was close to 0.0 after rook
really?
e8.
At which point?
After I went knight d2 and you went rook h to e8.
Yeah.
Yeah, because somehow takes. Yeah, knight e4 was wrong. I just had to develop the pieces. Rook d1, knight f3. Yeah, I don't know why I went for this knight e4. Spontaneous decision. And then...
I should actually go rook h f8 instead of rook e8. That's
rook h f8.
To anticipate bishop takes e6 and then f takes e6, the rook is opening up. That's actually quite nice.
Very not obvious. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for the game, Felix. This time some endgame masterclass for you, from you. For our audience, if you like this, guys, check out the Rook Endgames series on Felix's channel. Very nice, as I already said. And Felix, as for the plans for 2026, I wish you also to gain more rating. You have been gaining rating steadily recently, so I hope that your improvement also continues.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
And also improvement in the number of subscribers of your YouTube channel. So guys, don't forget to subscribe to both my and Felix's channels. We probably will do it like a collab, post it on both channels if you want.
Absolutely.
Okay, so this will be posted as a collab, so you will see both channels under the videos. So do not forget to click the like button, subscribe, and enjoy lots of chess in 2026. It's going to be exciting. Thank you, Felix.
Thank you.